Good morning. I'm Derek Milo, MAC Communications Director, and your host for this Camp County's webinar, Planning and Winning Millage Elections in a COVID World. The coronavirus pandemic is rapidly redefining how public entities conduct everything from routine business to major elections. Today's webinar will present advice on an age-old topic, planning and winning millages in this new COVID world. Joining us today are Adrian Heeman and Scott Bean of Grassroots Midwest. This Lansing-based firm has long experience in running grassroots field operations for legislative and local races, ballot initiatives, and issue awareness campaigns. Before we let Adrian and Scott get started, I just want to have a couple of quick notes. We will take questions at the end of their presentation, so if you do have questions, write them at any time in the question field in your toolbar. Also, please remember that the video and slide deck from today's event will be loaded to the Camp Counties page at micounties.org later today. So you can, any of your county colleagues who are not able to join us today, they can view it 24/7 at their convenience. So with that, we'll get started and I'll turn it over to Adrian and Scott.
Thanks a lot, Derek. I'm Adrian Heeman. I'm the CEO at Grassroots Midwest. I'm joined by Scott Bean. As Derek mentioned, we're a bipartisan firm that does issue awareness campaigns, political campaigns, local and state ballot initiatives, and other types of grassroots political consulting work. Today we're obviously talking about winning millage campaigns. And we're in a much different environment than we were just a few months ago in terms of what it takes to be able to run a campaign, right? The fundamentals of a campaign, what you need to achieve, haven't changed, but the environment that you're operating in is wildly different now, and you have to take account of that. It requires flexibility in getting your message out to voters, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more in context, but it requires a razor-sharp focus on absentee ballot programs because of the new availability under law and the popularity of doing that during the pandemic. There are four basic elements in our view to winning a local ballot campaign: your coalitions, your targeting, your messaging, and your process. So you guys don't need to see any more of that about our firm. So coalitions are the first thing here. This is one of the most important parts of winning a ballot campaign at the county level. Coalitions help you accomplish what a small group of individuals can't, and they help validate your message to the community. A well-functioning coalition provides resources to the campaign, provides volunteers, local business owners and philanthropic groups can provide sign locations. Obviously, they can provide votes. They can provide you with messaging opportunities, and again, like I mentioned, validators and advocates for your campaign. And you can form coalitions, using different sorts of groups and individuals, depending on your community. And this really varies a lot in terms of which coalition members are most important for your county, for your community. Churches and faith groups are really evergreen. It's large groups of people that are similar in discernible ways that you can reach out to and that provide an audience for the message and can provide you with with those volunteers and sign locations. Elected officials are a really important part of coalitions, both from a positive standpoint, being able to get your message out into the community from validators that are trusted, that people are used to voting for, but also in a negative way. It's very unhelpful to have local elected officials, whether they're county officials or township or municipal officials, that are actively working against your millage request, your local ballot initiative. So it's very important to be able to get those folks on side when you can. The organized labor in some areas of the state is super important for this. in addition to, you know, some of the things that are listed above in terms of volunteers and media opportunities, folks like organized labor and local business owners can provide money to help fund the campaign, so that you're not just trying to raise money for this from individual donors. Same thing goes for vendors and contractors. This is one of the things when we work with counties on millages. This is one of the first questions that we ask is, you know, who are the vendors and contractors that do business with the county in whatever space you're asking for money. Those folks should be helping to fund the campaign, right? They make money by the county being funded for whatever type of operations or capital needs that they assist with. And so it's in their financial interest to help you win your campaign, and they can be a real powerful tool as well. You know, again, every one of these millage campaigns is somewhat different based on the community that you're in. You know, some faith and cultural groups are more important in the Keweenaw County than in Wayne County. That's just a fact. There are ideas and associations that will sort of turn off different types of voters. So if you are from a very liberal county and you're rolling out endorsements from very conservative groups or individuals that are well known, that might be counterproductive. You know, the more competitive the electoral environment is between the political parties, the more important it is to have a balanced coalition. So if you're in one of those real politically competitive counties like a Kent County and Oakland County, where kind of could go either way depending on the year, then you really want to make sure that your coalitions are balanced, that you've got folks from both parties, from different sort of ideological perspectives, to make sure that you've got a place in the coalition for everyone. Coalition work is even harder right now, frankly. You know, it's people are obviously very busy. Work hours are kind of meaningless during the pandemic, and you know, it's hard to meet with people in person. A lot of this work traditionally gets done in meetings, right? Whether they're formal meetings or, you know, meeting somebody for coffee or a drink or for lunch, where you talk about, you know, why the millage is important and why they should be on board and what they can do to help. And that stuff has all got to be done electronically now. It's a lot harder to use the personal relationships that commissioners and other members of your ballot coalition have and leverage those when you can't be with people in person. And that just means giving yourself additional time to do that. Planning is always important with these millage campaigns, but it's even more important now. And that starts with how you build your coalition. You know, our view as a firm, sort of one of the reasons that our firm exists, whether it's for millage campaigns or anything else, is this idea that odd couple coalitions send a powerful message to voters. You know, just like our firm's got Republicans and Democrats and, you know, diverse sorts of folks, you know, being able to showcase that different sectors of your community, whatever that means in your county, are supportive of the millage is important for being able to win. And that includes in counties that aren't necessarily competitive between the parties, but where there are important differences between different communities, different faith groups, that sort of thing. You really want to make sure that you're tailoring your coalitions to what's important to your communities. So the age-old question in politics, and the question that you've got to be able to answer for your coalition partners, is what's in it for them? Why should they care? Why should they be part of the team? You want to make sure that you're using your time, which is even more valuable in these pandemic conditions, to pick influential targets that can fill a real need. And you've got to be able to talk to them about what are the benefits to them, whether that's as citizens, as business owners, as parents, you know, as animal lovers, if it's depending on what you're asking for in terms of a millage, what's in it for them? There's really not a more important question in any sort of politics that you can answer for a voter or a coalition partner than what's in it for them. And you want to make sure when you're trying to build coalitions, especially when you're trying to build diverse coalitions in support of your millage request, that you're sending the right people to make the ask. You know, people who have got relationships or some reason why they might be influential with the folks that you're making an ask to, and then make sure you go with a specific ask. Is it for money? Is it because you want to be able to communicate with their members? You know, whether that's a faith group or a labor union. You know, there might be a list, but make sure that you have an ask or asks that are specific. We'd like you to support the Millage campaign with a contribution of X thousand dollars. And we'd like you to send an email to your employees that about why it's important for them to vote yes. You want to make sure that you're matching your coalition targets to their benefits and how you can best use their talents. You know, there are a couple of examples that we've sort of got linked in the slide here. You know, and the benefits, hypothetically, depending on what sort of millage you're trying to get passed, that that you can sell to them, that you can tell them about why they should be involved. You know, so for farmers, you know, if you're asking for a road millage, you might talk to them about, you know, it being easier to get their products to market and reducing vehicle repairs by having better roads for them to drive on. You know, for local businesses, you know, they're going to care about that easier product shipment as well, but they're also going to care about access for their customers. So you want to make sure that when you're talking about the benefits to your potential coalition partners and to voters, that you're really leaning into benefits that make sense for them. Coalitions to be maximally effective, there needs to be really good coordination, and it's important that someone or someones, a small group of someones, are in charge of that coordination for the ballot committee, you know, for your team. And you need to determine who's in charge of outreach to different communities, to different business owners, and make sure that the entire team knows that, so that that person's being kept in the loop and can coordinate the activities of the coalition partners that you're able to bring on board. You know, and make sure that you're sort of asking yourself, in an effort to be coordinated, these logistical questions. If we're asking them for money, who's writing the check? Is it the business? Is it the CEO? Is it the executive director of a nonprofit? Who's writing the check? If they're contributing volunteers, what day do we want volunteers? Who's making sure that they show up, is getting them the information about where they need to be? We're going to talk some more about volunteers and what you can use them for a little bit later in our current sort of pandemic conditions. But you want to make sure that it's very clear, okay, if you're willing to volunteer on the campaign, or you're willing to publicize these volunteer opportunities to members of your organization, who do they contact? Where do they need to be? When do they need to be there? And what are the activities that we're asking them to engage in? The same thing goes with communication tactics. Somebody needs to be in charge of making sure that letters to the editors, op-eds, social media posts for our validators are on message, that message is coordinated, and that it's targeted at the groups that we want those coalition partners to be influential with. Next of the sort of 4 elements of a successful millage campaign is targeting. The coronavirus pandemic makes this even more important, and this is honestly one of the most important things about running a successful millage campaign. Who do you need to have on your side in your community? That broader question, really you have to drill down a little bit. The first question you have to answer is, how many votes do you need to win? Right? And that's based on how many people are likely to vote. You can determine that by looking at prior similar elections. So if you're on the ballot in the general election in a presidential year, you want to look at what turnout is for the last few elections during presidential years for those general elections. So you want to make sure that you're looking at similar elections so that you know how many people are going to vote. And then you're probably going to want to purchase some sort of data set or get a hold of the qualified voter file, so you know specifically who are these people that vote, because that's a matter of public record, not who you voted for, but if you voted. Where are the most effective voting blocks going to come from? That's in terms of geography, right? What are your bigger population centers where more of the vote comes from? But what are some characteristics that these voters share? And again, third-party data can be super helpful for that. But some of that is stuff that you just know about your communities. There are certain civic and philanthropic groups that are more important in some communities than others. Like, I'm a member of the Optimist Club in the town where I live, and we're kind of an optimist and Rotary town. In some other towns, it's the Lions Club, it's Kiwanis. What are those nonprofit and civic groups that are most influential in town? Those are blocks of votes and validators. Same thing with faith groups, labor groups. What are the most effective voting blocks that you need to reach out to? And then the next question in terms of the front end of your targeting is who's going to be on board right out of the gate? Who do we just need to go talk to, tell them that we're doing this, they're going to get it, and they're going to be on board? And who are we going to actually have to make the case to? And then obviously, the second order question with that is who's the right person to go make the case? I mentioned earlier the qualified voter file. This is something that your county clerk can get you access to for the county. There are certainly enhanced products that you can purchase. I strongly encourage that sort of thing when you're going to be running a millage, because you want as much information as possible about the voters in your county so that you can message to them most effectively. You can know what motivates them, what they need to hear about. You can also, some of these aftermarket products will allow you to track absentee voter status. Absentee voter status is going to be one of the most important things if you're running a millage this year that you can look at. People are going to vote absentee. It's going to vary some around the state in terms of how high that proportion is going to go. But if you think about pre-pandemic, in the local elections last year, there were communities where absentee voting was running as high as 70 to 80%. In a couple communities like Rochester, is even higher. So if you think about that pre-pandemic and the fact that the law in Michigan has been changed to allow no reason absentee voting, this is something you need to lean into really hard in terms of your targeting. Because if you're not communicating with absentee voters when they have their ballots, you may start communicating with folks too late. So it's really important to know who has applied to vote absentee, and then to work with your clerks to know when those ballots are going out. So for instance, right now, there are some communities where absentee ballots are already in voters' hands. Down in Oakland County, I know that the Farmington Hills city clerks sent their absentee ballots out on Saturday. So those are in voters' hands right now. There are some other communities where the ballots still haven't gone out. In Michigan, where I am, over in Eaton County, I know the Delta Township clerk is sending those ballots out sometime next week. But you need to know when those ballots are going to go out so that you can manage your resources effectively, and you can be talking to voters when they're actually making their decision. This is one of the, this is partly a pandemic issue and partly a change in law issue, but this is very different from how elections used to work. Absentee voters have always been important, especially because they've tended to be seniors who vote at a much higher propensity anyway. But really, it's hard to see how you win elections in the current environment without having a robust absentee voter strategy that involves tracking when people actually have ballots in their hands, so you can be communicating with them when they're making their voting decisions and in the run-up to that. Depending on how you're going to raise the money for the campaign, you can also get really valuable information about contribution history from voters in some of these aftermarket data products. Past petitions they've supported can also give you an idea of issues that are important to them. And to the extent that those relate to your millage request, you want to be able to talk to those voters about those issues in a way that resonates for them based on what petitions they've signed in the past. So this is an example of one of these aftermarket data products. We use this one occasionally. We use a number of other data products. It really depends on the application as to what's most appropriate for you. So I don't want folks to think that this is specifically a plug for practical political consulting. We use lots of other great vendors. It's just a user-friendly example. But if you look at the sort of left panel on this slide, you'll see some of the functionality that you're typically going to find in these aftermarket voter lists, right? So down at the bottom of the left panel, on the right-hand side, you'll see petition fields. So you can select for voters that signed one of these petitions. You can select for just men or women. You can select only for those records that have a phone number associated with them. If you have volunteers, doing campaign calls, or if you wanted to do a robocall to remind people to get out to vote or to send back their absentee ballots, it'll let you do suppressions like that. So you only have records for which you have a phone number. It will let you track. If you see the in the middle there, what says mail program, you can track which of these voters have received, whether it's mail or other types of communication from your campaign, so that you, for each of those voter records, you can look at, okay, here's all the people that received mailer X and all the people that received mailer Y, so you know how many more times you need to communicate with them. And then up near the top, there are the index selections, probability of being a Republican, probability of voting in November, probability of voting by AV. And those are, for this particular list product, those are based on an algorithm based on prior behavior. So if you're trying to only talk to Republicans or only talk to people who are likely to vote via AV, these aftermarket list products will allow you to do that. A couple of other things that can be helpful depending on how big a campaign you're running. Political consultants like ourselves, and there are others that do this work, can help you with a lot of aspects of this targeting. Building a plan for how many times you're going to touch each of the voters that we think are going to vote in the election, when they need to be touched based on whether they're likely to vote absentee or to show up on election day. There are also, for some of the larger millage campaigns, frankly, a little bit better funded millage campaigns, you can do polling. Polling varies wildly in quality and in its effectiveness. The better quality polling that you want, the more you're going to pay for it. But this can really help you a lot with targeting, especially in terms of targeting your messages, right? What do women over the age of 50 think about our millage proposal? Which arguments about it, which facts about it resonate most with them? Polling can give you answers to that, but it's not cheap. You can do automated polling with robocalls for relatively inexpensive. The responses to that are obviously going to skew very old because it's mostly older voters that still have landlines. You can do some online polling. It's hard to draw scientific samples from that. There are some vendors that have had success with doing that, and that's an option. The online polling is going to tend to skew a little bit younger, just like the robo polling is going to tend to skew a little bit older. But like a real live dial poll with a minimum sample of 500 is going to cost you more than $20,000. There are millage campaigns that are in a position to do that. Most of them won't be. Once you've figured out who your coalition partners need to be, and once you've put together a targeting plan for who needs to be reached and who those people are and what messages are going to resonate with them, then you've got to build your message. What do you say about the millage campaign, and how do you say it? And like we talked about, earlier, who's the right person to say it? Who's the right validator to deliver that message? The message gets built in 3 stages. You've got to show them the need, you've got to show them the benefits, and then you have to get them to take action. It starts with the need. So you need to be clear with voters about what problem are you addressing. You want your core messages about that problem to be singular and simple. You want to communicate it well and often, most importantly, to your team and your allies, so that everyone is, as I like to say, singing from the same hymnal, right? And you want to make sure that your message is not getting hijacked by people's personal stances on other issues, maybe even unrelated issues, or by personal rivalries in the community. You really want to make sure that you're working hard to keep everybody focused on the goal here and keep those distractions out of the way. Less is more. when it comes to slogans, when it comes to communication about the need for your millage and the benefits. You want to make sure that what you're saying is true, but you also want to make it as simple as possible. People don't want to read, they don't want to have to read a dissertation to understand what you're trying to accomplish. In terms of showing voters the benefits, and this is where that targeting and the coalitions can be so important, you've got to tailor your message to emphasize how the voter is going to benefit from the millage. That's not going to be the same for every voter. There are certain benefits that are broadly shared in the community. There are certain benefits that are going to be more meaningful to subgroups within the county, whether that's farmers or small business owners or healthcare workers or whatever it is that you're going to seek a millage for. And that means you have to know your voters. You've got to create universes for these communication tactics, whether it's direct mail or letters to the editor or door knocking, which we're going to talk about later, which could be difficult, lit dropping, phone calls from volunteers. You want to build universes for that based on data, based on knowable facts about who these voters are. You've got to be able to paint the problem as serious, that it needs to be addressed. And you need to be able to paint the problem as solvable by the millage, right? If we do this, we can address problem X. You got to talk to the voters only about the parts of the millage that they care about, right? And this is, again, part of why the targeting piece of this is so important, and having, coalitions that include validators that can deliver the right part of the message. If we're seeking a message, if we're seeking a millage around roads, we want to talk to those small business owners about about accessibility for their customers, but we don't necessarily want to talk to them about some of the other aspects of the millage that they might not care about. Don't ever try to explain away the cost of a millage to voters. Even if the cost is low, people don't like paying taxes, right? You have to level with people that we're asking you for X in order to do this. But don't try and downplay or try to explain away the fact that there's a cost associated with it. People feel like you're being disingenuous when you do that. Even if the cost isn't that much, just be blunt about it. If we do this, we get this. You want to make sure that you're using a variety of contact points to deliver your message. Let's talk about door knocking right now.
Adrian, can I
Yeah.
put in on you?
Yeah.
Sorry to be so abrupt on it, but we're going to pause for just a couple of minutes for a couple of sponsor messages, and give you a chance to get a drink of water. So if everybody would bear with me here as we get, here we go. And
welcome to everyone attending the Michigan Association of Accounting Summer Webinar here today. My name is Emma Cook. I am with Enbridge Energy, and I'm a community engagement analyst based here in beautiful Mackinac City. And I just wanted to start off today by saying thank you to all of you who work so hard every day to address the issues and concerns of our Michigan communities. My name is Candace Braddock, and I'm the Senior Community Engagement Advisor. Here at Enbridge, we value our partnership with county government across the state and across every mile of our pipeline system. That partnership makes it possible to protect the Great Lakes, create good paying Michigan jobs,
Okay, thank you for indulging us with that brief break. Adrian, I believe you have screen control back. So if you want to share your screen.
I do.
And there we are. Look at that smooth transition.
Absolutely. All right. Well, that was a good time for a break, because now we get to the depressing part of the program, where we talk about door knocking. So in the context of our communication techniques for delivering our message. Typically, when we do campaign trainings, whether it's for millages or for political campaigns, candidate campaigns, we talk to people about a sort of hierarchy of touches. The social psychology research will tell you that you got to touch people about 8 times for them to remember your name, remember your cause, whether they have a good, bad, or indifferent opinion about it, but just for them to remember who you are. The most effective of those types of touches, really since, I don't know, the ancient Greeks, if you want something from somebody, walk up to them, shake their hand, and ask them for it. That includes their vote, their money, their support. That's really the most effective thing, is personal conversations. And those are difficult, if not impossible, to do in a systematic way under these pandemic conditions. I will say that there's some variation in that. What we have seen across the state, certain areas of the state, people seem okay with folks coming to their doors. People are out and about more, they're congregating in groups more, and they have been for a while. In other parts of the state, that is absolutely not the case. And we've got some data around this that we've seen over the last few weeks. It's by no means systematic data. It's from a couple different places around the state. But we've seen, particularly in Southeast Michigan, where COVID-19 has been the worst, and in West Michigan, that, you know, if you ask people whether they would be comfortable with someone from a campaign coming to their door to talk to them, about 70% of people say no, for the primary election this year. If you ask them about the general election, which obviously is thinking pretty far into the future, that drops to about 70%, or excuse me, to about 50% of people that say that they would be uncomfortable with someone coming to their door. I suspect, and I don't have any data to back this up yet, but I suspect that in other areas of the state that that's not the case, and you might be able to get away with doing doors. You also want to be careful about doing doors right now from a messaging perspective. We obviously live in a very sort of fraught, polarized political environment where people are, you know, looking to make political hay out of basically everything. For instance, if you're seeking some sort of millage related to public health, and someone or someones from the public health department have been really leaning into, you know, the need for social distancing because of COVID, that sort of thing, you might get accused of some amount of hypocrisy if you send people out to knock doors in support of a millage like that. So those are, some of this is needing to know your community and what behavior in your community has been like over the last few weeks and months to make an appropriate determination about whether you should be knocking doors. So there's nothing that's more effective under normal circumstances, but these aren't normal circumstances, and you need to be really intentional about that. Literature dropping is a little bit different. You know, going to people's homes and just dropping off a piece of campaign literature that lays out, again, you know, frames out the problem, the statement of the need, the benefits, and then calling them to act. You need to vote, you need to donate, you need to volunteer, the things that they can do to help you win. Literature drops people have seemed okay with in the limited data that we've seen about this, even in some of the harder hit areas of the state. There's definitely a cohort of people that are uncomfortable with it, but it's not nearly as strong as with the actual door knocking, with having conversations with people on their doorstep. So direct mail is sort of an evergreen campaign tactic for these millage campaigns. It's not as effective as door knocking. It simply isn't. But in a lot of counties, you have to knock a whole lot of doors in order to reach every voter. And you know, you might not be able to put together the volunteer base to do that, or afford to be able to pay people to go knock doors. Direct mail is a great way to target individual voters without actually having to go to their doorstep and drop off a piece of mail, or having to knock on their door and have a conversation. Essentially, you know, you want to be real targeted about this. You want to make sure that you're only mailing to people who are likely voters. You want to make sure that you're mailing to people at the right time, particularly taking account of those absentee voters and when they're going to have ballots, to make sure that you're communicating with them in the run up to them making their voting decision. But direct mail is a really good communication tactic, partly because it's a physical thing that voters have to handle. Despite some of the, you know, the COVID concerns that are out there about touching surfaces, that sort of thing, people still have to handle it, right? We know the direct mail is mostly going in the trash, and that's okay, because the voter still has to pick it up out of the mailbox and walk it to the trash. And you know, these glossy 6x11 or larger mailers, they're going to stand out from your standard envelope when the voter goes out to get their mail. And you know, you're going to have several seconds, if not a minute or two, while the voter is, you know, coming in from the street from the mailbox, or coming in from the front door in the mailbox, going through the mail, and throwing it in the trash to get your message across. It's part of the reason why it's so important to use simple, understandable messages with your communication tactics. Is sometimes you have a very short window of time when the voter is going to be receptive to the message, but direct mail is great for that. Television and radio are also super effective. You know, there are issues with each of them. You know, with television, it's expensive. Even cable TV is on the expensive side. You know, especially depending on how big an audience you're talking to. If you're in a more rural county, that might be economical for you. You know, depending on how much money you're able to raise for the millage campaign, Cable television in particular might be worth considering. Broadcast TV simply is not worth considering for millages outside of the sort of tri-county area in Southeast Michigan. It's prohibitively expensive. And it has the same problem that you have with a lot of radio buys for a millage campaign, is that you're talking to a lot of people who aren't voters, who may not even live in your county. Broadcast television has that same problem, right? You're paying for a media market, not for a specific county or group of addresses, or specific community. You're just paying for the media market. Same thing goes for radio, right? You're paying for whatever they can reach. And so in all likelihood, unless it's a very small radio station, you're reaching voters outside the county. The flip side of that is radio tends to be pretty economical for an over-the-air communication technique. And so that's something that you want to consider. Social media is more important than ever. It gets more important every day that goes by for all sorts of campaigns and elections. The pandemic has only made that more so, because a lot of people are sitting around in their homes scrolling through their connected devices, whether that's phones or tablets or whatever. Being able to advertise on Facebook is super helpful. Twitter does not do political ads, paid political ads anymore. But Facebook and Instagram are owned by the same company, and this can be a good way to get your message in front of voters. It's important to know that you can't just flip a switch and start advertising on social media. Facebook has a rigorous verification process. It's multiple steps. It involves using the U.S. mail and mailing a physical copy of a driver's license to Facebook in California before they'll allow you to do paid political advertising on Facebook. But it's worth doing. When you're in the planning stage of a millage campaign, you want to get to work on that right away. Who's managing the social media page? Let's get that person verified. And then we have to go through the process of getting our disclaimer verified by Facebook. The other thing that is getting more and more popular that you would probably need to outsource to someone is what we call digital geotargeting. This has been in the news a lot lately. You've heard some breathless stories about various protests being geotargeted, that type of thing. Obviously, we don't have a lot of people that are going to be congregating in groups in your counties, but one of the things that these digital geotargeting techniques allow you to do is that you can just target the voter file. The same way that you're going to target your direct mail, you can target social media ads to specific households, and it's accurate down to a distance of about 3 meters. So what that means is that, if there's an address that's in the voter file that we think is a likely voter that we want to communicate with, we can target their address specifically in all of the devices in the home that are connected to that same internet connection, and serve them ads for the millage campaign that way. That also allows you to, just like direct mail, it allows you to be super targeted based on the address, but it also allows you to segment your messages a lot. So you can have one message that you're advertising with this geo-targeting that's for people who are, 50 and above. You can have one message that's specific to, women with young children. Depending on what type of millage you're trying to sell to the voters, you can be really targeted with the messages that you're delivering to people. And it's overall pretty cheap. Each individual impression that you get with digital geo-targeting is far less expensive than doing direct mail, because not only are you not paying for print, you're not paying for postage. Basically, you're just paying for the graphic design like you would with a piece of direct mail, and then you're paying for the voter's eyeballs, and that's it. Let's see if I can get this. There we go. In terms of showing people the benefits, there's like we said, there's the direct mail. The phones is one other thing. Volunteers can do a lot of this, especially since we can't really knock doors the way we normally would. This is a great way for volunteers for the campaign to make contact with voters, answer their questions, ask them to get involved. You want to take advantage of events as they start happening in your communities. This is, again, going to be very different depending on what part of the state you're in. In some places, a lot of the events that we've got listed here have already been canceled. I know there are a number of counties that have canceled their county fairs. A lot of the fish fries and stuff that I would normally go to because I like fried fish are being shut down. A lot of the charitable events and that sort of thing. But you want to keep an eye out for these opportunities, whether they are political in nature or not. I know a lot of farmers markets are still open. People are still going to those. It's a great opportunity to hand out literature to people and to sort of get your message out. So you want to take advantage of that stuff, because really that's just volunteers and a piece of literature, touching all the voters that come through there. So getting folks to act. Obviously, our primary goal is that we want a majority of voters to support our millage request. That takes money in order to be able to communicate with the voters. Asking for money is difficult. Even when you're asking for money for millage, you want to make sure that you're regularly reminding voters of the importance of the millage and how they're going to benefit. You want to make sure that each of these voters gets multiple touches of different kinds. So you don't just want to be touching voters with direct mail. If you're able to door knock, you want to door knock. If you're able to get volunteers to come in and phone bank for a while, or phone bank from their homes, you want them to get a phone call. You want them to see you at the farmer's market. You want them to hear about the millage in a church bulletin, that type of thing. You also want to make sure that as you're making contact with voters, you're constantly referring back to that voter file and identifying who supports you. So when your volunteers make contact with a voter, when your validators make contact with a voter, and we know that they're supportive, we want to have that marked in our voter list, because you want to be able to flush out people that you know support you. That's the most important thing you can do, is every person that you've identified that supports your millage request, you want to make 100% certain that they vote. Process. Before you start with a millage, you want to make sure that you've got all your ducks in a row. You want to make sure that you understand the legal boundaries of what you're allowed to do, what the requirements are for campaign finance reporting, and what you're allowed to do in terms of communication. You need to make sure you follow the law. You file a ballot committee with the clerk. The clerks are generally very good about answering questions about this if you're not sure about what exactly you're supposed to do. The forms are also available on the Michigan Secretary of State's website, so you can look at them before you actually go into file with the clerk. Some counties will engage in some public education with taxpayer dollars. I've got this flagged on this slide because I also know of counties that have gotten into trouble with this, not necessarily from a legal perspective, but the front page test. You're legally permitted to communicate with voters about what's on the ballot, particularly when they're being asked for their money. You can make factual statements about what appears on the ballot and what the money is for with taxpayer dollars. You know your community's best, and whether that is going to inflame voters or not. Our experience has been that in the most conservative counties in the state, it's a good idea to avoid this. But in most counties, it's okay if you're not spending a lot of money. Campaigns are complicated. When you start going through and setting up your process for this, you need to have someone on your campaign team that is an attorney. Both in terms of the compliance piece of this, filing your campaign finance reports, making sure that your campaign communication complies with the law, that it's got appropriate disclaimers on it, so that your ballot committee is not gonna suffer any fines. It's really important to get some legal advice about this. Most of the ballot committees that we've dealt with before, someone who's on the ballot committee is an attorney, most of the successful ones anyway. So you really want to make sure that you invest in the planning piece of that. You want to make sure that you invest up front in a voter list so that you can have a real plan. You know who you need to contact, and you can build a real budget. In general, unless you're going for just a millage renewal for a very small amount, it's good to talk to campaign professionals about this, whether you hire somebody or not. I say that sort of speaking against our own interest, but we end up giving a lot of free advice to counties and local governments about what they should do. Some of them hire us, some of them don't. But it's a really good idea, whether it's us or it's one of the other professional campaign communication firms, to reach out to somebody and just like, hey, what would you do in this instance? To make sure that you're doing the right things at the outset, and make sure that you've got a campaign plan that can actually win. Again, the goal is 50% plus one. If you get a majority of voters to support your millage, that's what we're all driving at, when we put one of these things on the ballot. So with that, I'm going to stop. I want to make sure that we leave some time for questions. I know we've only got an hour booked, and I've been talking for a while.
Great, thanks, Adrian. Again, if you type in your questions into the question field, I can read them out to our two experts today. And while we're waiting on that, posing to both of you, Adrian, you mentioned, of course, the double whammy that we're seeing and how people vote, in the sense of one, Prop 3 changing us to no reason absentee, plus you've got pandemic concerns. Can you kind of talk a little bit about what the data from the industry shows on when people who do vote absentee actually fill out the ballot? So generally speaking, how long after they get their ballot in the mail do they fill it out and send it back?
Sure. If you think about this in terms of a graph, it's a spike with a long tail, right? Within the first 10 to 14 days of an absentee ballot arriving at most voters' homes, it's going to be back in the mail to the clerk. So you got a couple weeks or less from when those ballots get delivered. Now, there's a subset of voters that represent that long tail. We kind of call them shoebox voters, right? They're going to wait. They're going to get a bunch of direct mail communication. They're going to hear the commercials. They're going to talk to people they know. They're going to spread it all out on the table and make a decision. That's not most voters. Usually about 65% of ballots are going to be back within the first 2 weeks.
Okay, so that's really, if anybody's going to be running a millage campaign, they need to know when those absentees are going out and have all of their messaging campaign has to be running at full throttle in those 2 weeks, because after that, deeply diminishing returns.
That's absolutely right. It's part of why the voter list is so important too. If you get a good voter list product, from a third-party vendor, most of those do what we call absentee chase. So they're buying the qualified voter file from the state every night and updating their voter file during absentee season. So you can chase those voters. You can chase them on the phone. You can chase them with a first-class mail piece that somebody just like slaps a stamp on and throws in the mail, reminding people to vote, reminding people about the millage. You can chase those voters, but yeah, the bulk of them, you want to make sure that you've been communicating with them in the run-up to the ballots actually being mailed to them, and that means you got to be in close communication with your clerk.
Okay. Still, again, if you want to pose your questions, please type them into the question field. I've got another one, kind of putting both of you on the spot here. Based upon these new trends and what we've seen so far under the Proposal 3 rules, what do you think the percentage of the electorate in August and November will be voting absentee this year?
The folks I talked to, the best estimates that they've had from their research is for the primary, it's probably going to be north of 80%. We expect it'll be a little bit lower potentially for the general election, but I think a lot of that depends on the virus, right? If we're experiencing a second COVID wave in the fall, then that could be higher. But right now we're predicting about 80%, maybe a little north of that for the primary.
Okay, so 8 out of 10 votes are coming in through the mail and not through the polling place. That's obviously something for everybody to be aware of. Kind of related to that, while we're waiting on some questions, obviously we haven't made any changes yet in state law on how votes are processed. So with so many votes pretty much transferring from traditional polling places to the absentee flow, what can our county leaders expect to see from their local clerks on when results are actually going to be available?
It's a great point, and I don't think people have thought about this enough yet. The days of learning the result of a closely contested election on election night may be over completely. As more and more voting happens through the mail, You know, those ballots, at least as it stands right now, those don't get counted until election night. And, you know, so if you're breaking open bags and bags and bags of absentee ballots on election night, hand counting those could take a while. And so, yeah, I do expect that with the closer results, we may not know for a day or two, or I mean, that's going to be really interesting just with the presidential election in November, which I expect the overall result to be close, if not certain states. Might be a few days before we know who won.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a different process. Well, I do not see any questions in my question field. I'm going to attribute that to the quality of the presentation of the presenter.
Well, thank you.
And I'm speaking about Adrian. I don't think I'm going to give Scott any credit. He just sat there and, oh, here we've got a question. Oh, well, yep, that's not really a question, but yep, okay. We are coming up to the end of our hour, so I do want to thank everyone for joining us again today for the second of our 5 Camp County webinars. Again, the video and slide deck will be available at micounties.org later today. I do want to thank our various partners for supporting our educational efforts. First, Adrian and Scott of Grassroots Midwest. Grassroots Midwest has presented with us before in our in-person regional summits, and we do appreciate them downshifting into this virtual format. Also, all of this was made possible through support of firms like Enbridge and EnviroLogic, who are key supporters of our Camp County series. Please remember to visit the camp page at micounties.org to register for our next 3 events, starting with a webinar on June 24 on using tech to improve the handling of your court records. Might not be the sexiest of topics, but it is an important one, so please do consider registering for that and encouraging your county colleagues to do the same. And with that, I will sign us off, and I wish everyone safety and good health.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.